welcome to episode 30 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. Ten weeks ago, I had Coach Jim Johnson on Anchored in Education to talk about that magical night back in 2006 when his senior manager, J-Mac as they called him, entered the game with a little over 4 minutes left on the clock. The night was special because Jason is autistic, but that didn't stop Coach, and it sure didn't stop J-Mac, who got hot as a pistol and put up 20 points by the end of the game and ignited a media frenzy and gave the world an opportunity to see that good people and magic moments still exist. If you haven't checked out that episode, go to my website, escottengland.com, and listen to it now. After I finished the episode, I got to talk to Coach Johnson for another half hour or so. In our conversation, he pointed out that a 30-plus year career in the classroom and on the court leads to a lot of lessons learned. He sent me over some information about the leadership lessons he shares. I was more than thrilled when he agreed to come back on Anchored in Education to share a little more with us. I always enjoy reading his blog and Twitter posts, and I'm excited for all of you to get to hear him again. Coach, welcome back to Anchored in Education.
Thanks so much for having me again, Scott. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, I am too, and I think my listeners are as well. The last time you were on Anchored in Education, we spent the majority of our time talking about that miracle night back in 2006. And although we touched on your coaching career, I don't think we really, delved into how coaching helped shape who you are today and the principles by which you live. So, what would you say, or what would you believe was the biggest takeaway from coaching that has assisted you off the court?
Well, I think that a real eye-opener early in my career that helped me immensely, although it was very painful going through, is when I graduated from college, my dream was that I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to be a boys varsity basketball coach at a high school. And my dream came true pretty quickly. After 3 years of serving as an assistant at a couple different schools, I became a head coach at a school about 20 minutes from where I grew up in suburb of Rochester, New York. And the program was not in good shape, but at that point I had this pretty big ego that thought I was going to turn this program that wasn't very good, from the outhouse to the penthouse in a very short period of time. And after 2 games, we were 1-1, and I thought, I'm okay, I've got this. And then as I kid people in my great coaching wizardry, I led that team to 17 consecutive losses. And that was a very humbling experience. And then it's a long story, but the bottom line is they ended up letting me go. It ended up being probably one of the best experiences for me in reflection, because the 2 things that really manifested from that was, number one, that I realized that I wanted to prove that school wrong for letting me go. Sure. And that burn never went away for 30 years. I mean, I never forgot that. But I think even as important, if not more important, is it really humbled as someone that had a fairly big ego, and I realized that I had a lot to learn about leadership and coaching. And that's really when I started my journey of making leadership and coaching and learning as much as I can to be a more effective leader. That really catapulted me, making that a study that helped me immensely. Although I will say I got an opportunity to coach at the varsity level after a year as an assistant coach in a college. And things were a little bit better, but it took me really a decade until I really got things going, consistently in a successful manner. So it wasn't something where I got the opportunity to go in and start having great success. But in reflection, I think it helped me immensely because it really made me realize that I had to keep growing and keep getting better. And fortunately, that was reflected in my career, where the last decade of my career was by far the most successful. We had never won a sectional championship until Jason's night at night, and then we ended up winning 6 in my last 10
Wow.
years, and we made the finals 8 times. And when I talk to when I do presentations, I often share, because people ask me, how do you get to the top? And that's like a process that we can talk a little more. But I think the more difficult question is, how do you stay at the top? And, those are a couple of ideas that I have on that, is very much, that when I share to various leaders of organizations, that I think is essential to, because, you see it all the time in businesses, you see it all the time, and, with athletic teams, they make it to the top, but then they spiral down pretty quickly. So it's as much hard work as it takes to get there. It's just as challenging to stay there.
Absolutely. I love the outhouse to penthouse analogy there. That I think a lot of times in leadership we kind of look at that. We take it on as a challenge, but we're I don't know, we're looking for that magic bullet, that magic fix to go, and it's not an overnight process, and that's I think what you're
Absolutely not.
getting to.
Yep, for sure.
So success, that's something we strive in whatever our area may be. So I mean, that could be a teacher, that could be an administrator, it could even be a board member.
Hmm.
You frequently talk about the 6 keys to success, which are passion, mission, goals, perseverance, carpe diem, and team player. In
Right.
fact, you use these keys to set up your book, A Coach and a Miracle, that we talked about last time. Um,
Right.
so, can we spend a little time going into detail on how these 6 keys work cohesively toward achieving success?
Yeah, and you know what? And I'll say one thing immediately before. I think the huge thing for all people is really being clear about what your definition of success is, because I think it's different for a lot of people, and making sure that you have clarity of what success means to you, and then I think you can base off principles that I'll talk about. So, in going through those 6 keys, is that number one is that finding something you love to do, and as much as you hear it all the time, I think we forget that when you find something you're very passionate about, you end up usually being quite good in it because you invest a lot of time, because you enjoy it. And I reflect back. I loved coaching, and I invested a lot of time, but it didn't feel like work. I can't say that all the time. I mean, there was some times when I was up to midnight watching a film that this is work.
Right.
But at the same time, when you find what you really love to do, and you understand, that this drives you, I think that helps you immensely. And even if it's finding things that you can do part time or a hobby, I think is very helpful. The second thing is, and I talk about this in both my inspirational talk. I talk about success, and then my leadership talk is finding and discovering your mission in life. I think is so essential. And as I mentioned earlier, when I lost that first coaching job, and I started to read a lot about leadership, I started to find the question is why we put on this earth. And when I was in my 20s and to close to 30, I still couldn't answer that question. And then I really started to spend time thinking about, what did I value, and, what was I all about? And when I became clear about having my own personal mission statement, it's something I challenge, because when I travel all over the country, when I ask how many people in the audience have a personal mission statement, it's a very, very small percentage. And I think the one thing I can really share with your listeners is when you have clarity about what you're all about, I think it helps you immensely in making the choices you make, and and being the example you want to be. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And I'm far from perfect. I've made more than my share of mistakes. Just ask my wife. But what I realized is when I had that foundation, and my mission, by the way, is to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And that was really came up with the idea that I wanted to live a life of integrity. I wanted to share my knowledge and my time, talent, and treasure with others to help them achieve their dreams. And that helped me immensely as a leader in understanding that piece. Then going to the third one, goal setting, is certainly something that everyone's heard of. Other than people who even live in a cave. I mean, if
Right.
you bring up goals, it's not like they're saying, "Oh, what's that? I've never heard of that." But I've done a lot of research, and we spent a lot of time working with our players on how to achieve their goals and how to set their goals, and so it's something I talk about. I do a whole different breakout session on goal setting because I think it's that essential. And really, it comes down to is knowing what you want and developing clarity by writing it down. And one of the areas that I will spend time with people is, and we did this with our players, is we got them to write out their most important goals, and in that case it was their basketball goals or academic goals and a family goal, and we asked them to put them on index cards and read it in front of a mirror in the morning and at least just before they go to bed, and it just reinforced what was most important to them, and then thinking about am I taking action steps to make those goals come to fruition? So, as I'm real good with quotes. I used to give my team a quote every day, and one of my goal-setting quotes is, when you think it, ink it, which of course means to write it down. And, again, I ask, my audiences now when I do my presentations, and still a very low percentage have their goals written down. And so I do a little goal-setting exercise to help them mentally enforce, what is most important in their life. And then the fourth one is perseverance. And certainly Jason J. Mac McElwain was one of my greatest examples of that. I think all successful people have setbacks, and the ability to bounce back and overcome obstacles and finding a way is so important. And I bring up Jason. I was a head coach for 30 years, and I rarely ever had a student athlete, if they didn't make our basketball team, would come out the next year and try again. And yet Jason did it 3 straight years. I admired that immensely, that he wanted to be part of us, and even when he faced rejection, that he stayed with it. And that was really neat to see that, how he did stay with us and got an opportunity to play there. And then my fifth one is carpe diem, which of course means seize the day. And the thing that I used to stress all the time with my players, and now I do when I do my presentations, is to be outstanding. I think you have to be exceptional in things you control. And I always start with your attitude. What attitude are you bringing? And I mentioned I love quotes, and I used to always say to my players, attitudes are contagious, as you're worth catching. And it really made them think, and it's something that made me think every day. When I came in to work with my team, did I have the appropriate attitude? I certainly can't say that I was perfect every day, but it really made me think. And then the other thing I used to really emphasize all the time with our players is the fact that we've got to do our best every day and work hard. And as simple as that is, easier said than done. And that's something that we really try to implement standards of excellence that we were striving to achieve every single day. And, that was set up by goal setting and our players coming together. What is our team goals? We used to have a team meeting after the team was chosen, and we would go through and I would get a lot of feedback from them about, what their team goals were. And, and then it was a matter of now putting it together and working together on that. And so it was a carpe diem to seize the day and be ready, and I would give Jason an illustration again, is that, you know what? He didn't know if he was going to get in, but he always was one of the last guys to stay late and do some extra shooting. He was loved by his teammates because he always had a great attitude every day, and he was always encouraging. And you know, the one thing that leads into my last one is a team player. And to me, the ultimate about Jason's game that a lot of people aren't aware of is that you know, we had a very difficult early part of that season, which is my book, A Coach and a Miracle. I'm not going to delve into it. It's a little bit too long a story. But Jason was kind of our rock. And the really neat thing is when I put Jason in those last 4 minutes, I had never asked our players to pass him the ball, but because of their great respect and love of Jason, he actually was the only one that shot in the last 4 minutes. And in fact, I kid him once in a while. You know, I see him still quite a bit, and I said, Jason, you know, I'm still looking for your first assist. You never passed the ball once. And he laughs about it. But, you know, there's something to really be said. You know, to me, that was the essence of what a team should be, you know, to shine the light on others. And certainly that was really special that happened that night. You know, especially after he missed his first couple shots, and yet the fact they kept feeding him, and then, you know, as he said, he got hot as a pistol.
Hot as a pistol, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, in your book, you go one step further. You talk about staying true to yourself, and
Right.
I believe that this is a huge character flaw in some that who experience success, and you know, I think we most commonly know it as getting too big for your britches. So, what would be your strategies for remaining humble in success? Because you've already alluded to, you know, your humbling experience.
Well, it's certainly an interesting challenge because I think any time that someone starts to have a lot of success in their lives, I think that what happens, I heard this once, is that the person that doesn't have a lot of money and then all of a sudden comes into a lot of money for whatever reason, that they will sometimes change them, but sometimes I've heard it put this way: if you're a good person before you have money, and then you have good money, and then you have a lot of money, you tend to still be a good person, although it doesn't always happen.
Sure.
And if you're a bad person when you didn't have any money, and then you come into a lot of money, you usually tend to stay as a bad person. So I think when I share about being true to yourself, I think the thing that's most important is, I brought that up before, is that when I gained clarity about who I was all about, my why, what I call my personal mission statement, that was significant for me. And that's why I really push, you know, when I go out and share my leadership presentation with leaders all over the country, it's something I really, because it's interesting, Scott, I run across a lot of effective leaders, but many of them do not have a mission statement. And I think that's where, if you don't have that value base and have clarity about what you're all about, and then all of a sudden you get great success, that can lead to problems. And I truly believe that's what helped me immensely, is that, you know, when my career really exploded, where, you know, I obviously had the JMAC game, but then we started to win. We were averaging my last 9 years, 18 wins a year, and we only played 20 regular season games. So that's pretty good. But I realized that, the other side of that is I had humble pie. I mean, I got fired from my first coaching position. So I know that other side. So when things came where we started to have great success on a regular basis, I realized that I had to stay the same person, because of what really jumped out at me is, I think, because we stayed the course and I understand what I was all about, and our program, our kids understood what we were all about as a program, what we stood for. You know, we talked about developing winners on and off the court. I think that's really important. And then the other thing I'll share is that I think it's important as a leader you keep growing. And one of the things, when I started to really study effective leadership, one of the things that always came back to me is effective leaders, the research consistently says, stay humble. And I think that, you know, Jim Collins brought that up in his book, Good to Great, and something that really stuck with me, that no matter how much success you have, humility is essential to staying effective as a leader.
Oh, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And speaking of leader, let's go ahead and shift back to the leadership lessons from half court. And
Right.
you've mentioned this. You've traveled the country, talking to a variety of audiences. Ranging all the way from your Fortune 500 companies all the way to educational institutions. And so,
Hmm.
to be an effective leader, you highlight 7 keys, and that's the clarifying vision, building trust, creating the edge, effective communication, leading by example, leaving a profit, and servant leadership. Do you think we could take just a little bit of time and expound on these 7 keys?
Absolutely. So the first one is clarifying vision. Is that, I talked about that a little bit earlier, but just to reinforce is that I think people that are following leaders, they want direction. They want
Absolutely.
the people to help. As a leader, you got to help your people get to a destination that they're looking for. And obviously when I was coaching, that was we were trying to win a championship as far as something that was purely measurable. If you're in the classroom and maybe trying to have every student pass the final exam or whatever it happens to be, but at the same time, I think in clarifying your vision and direction, I think you need to have clarity as a leader who you are first, that what I call the why, and that I really believe is understanding your most important values and then putting it into a statement, which I call a personal mission statement, and having clarity. And my mission statement is to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And when I was making decisions, and if I did something where I was like, you know what, I didn't follow my mission, I got to change that and correct that. And the closer that I stayed to my mission, the more success I had. There was no question about that. And then the second thing is building unity with your team by clarifying what is your team mission. And we discussed our team mission was to develop winners on and off the court. And we would define that on a daily basis. What does it take to win on the court? Yes, winning the game is part of that. But how about being an excellent teammate? How about being someone that handles adversity and is a good sport when adversity strikes? How about off the court? Are you as good a student as you can possibly be? Are you giving back to the community? So those are the things we strive for, the bigger why than just winning the basketball game. The second key is building trust, which I believe as a leader, once you have clarity about the direction and what you're all about, this is by far the most important, because if you don't have trust in an organization, you will really struggle. And, the few years that early in my career, in assessing why we didn't have success, a lot of it had to do is because we just didn't do a very good job of building trust between the players and the coaching staff and the parents, the whole works. So I think that is something that we really became very conscious. In building trust, we talked about 3 areas about focusing, and one was that we wanted to do what we say and say what we do. I think it's very frustrating if you're inconsistent, and inconsistency hurts trust. I always
Oh,
compare
yeah.
it to building a bank account. And, if you consistently put deposits in, chances are the trust account's going to grow in a more effective way. And if you're continuing to have withdrawals, but also along those lines is the fact that you can destroy trust with one really bad decision. And that's where I lead my second one, is we want to be transparent. So we really talk to our players about telling each other the truth. And I give an illustration. What I did for my last 2 decades is I would get in front of my players and parents after the team was chosen, and I would share with them that I wasn't going to drink alcohol during the season because being a role model was extremely important to me. And therefore, fortunately, I kept my word on that. But let's say, for illustration, that I 2 weeks later got a DWI. What do you think that would have done
Yeah,
to the
that
trust account?
that trust is
It would have,
gone. It's
it's
depleted.
destroyed it, and probably would never get back. Certainly without with that team, and maybe it would take years. So that's
Yeah.
the essence of that. And then the third thing I talk about was something that Ken Blanchard talked about, the 1-minute manager. I was fortunate to meet Ken a couple years ago, and I've read a lot of his information, and I'm so with him, is the fact that catching people doing the right thing. He called it, he had a great illustration. He said, because he was a former college professor, and he'd always talk about, I was trying to find ways so my students could get an A on the paper, not put so many red marks. And it made so much sense that, often we're trying to look at the opposite of what did they do wrong. And certainly, part of leadership is you have to correct. But I think if you catch people doing the right thing more, you're going to build that trust account, which is so hugely important. The third one was create the edge. And I truly believe effective leaders are always trying to find a way they create an edge for their team or organization. And I'll give you two examples. One would be is that we would use other voices, and we would bring people in from the community. I used to hire a strength coach, so I would use other voices to share with my team. I would have the captains talk to the team. We've really tried to make this a group effort, not just one voice. It was one voice at the end, in the sense that I had to make the final decisions, but certainly I think using other voices is important in leadership and building an edge for your team. And then the other part is we spent a lot of time teaching our teams and our individuals how to set effective goals, and we spent a lot of time on that. And I think that's essential. And one of the things that I believe we did very well, that I did not do early in my career very well at all, that I think is essential, is the people you lead, you got to meet with them one-on-one, your direct reports, and really have clarity about what they're about, because relationships are so important. And also have clarity of what their goals are and how they fit into the overall goals of the team or organization. I think that's so essential, and we often neglect that. Then we wonder why these people leave our organizations, because they don't feel like they're being heard. And so I think that's really important in creating an edge. Fourth one was effective communication, which we can piggyback. I just talked about the one-on-one meetings. But the thing I really emphasized there, I start by saying I think it is helpful as a leader if you can be a good public speaker and inspire your troops. But I don't think it's essential. I've studied a lot of leaders. I know some that are not very good public speakers, yet they're very effective leaders. So I think it's helpful, but not essential. What I do believe is essential is number two, and that is the ability to become a much better listener. And again, going through all my mistakes early in my career, I thought I was the know-all, end-all, and I realized that I wasn't the know-all, end-all. And as soon as I started to do a much better job of listening to my players, and one illustration of that, we used to meet every week, usually on Mondays, with a captain's meeting, and we have an organized agenda, and I would often invite other players that were not captains into the meeting so that they would get an understanding of what we're looking for as a team. And I remember I would always start out with questions like, how is our chemistry? How can I support you as a coach? Tell me what we need to focus in on this week, Because one thing that I always used to share with my players, and I think they respect it, is I said, I always want to listen to you. I'm not always going to agree with you, and I'll tell you why, but I'm always willing to listen. And I think that's so essential. The fifth one is lead by example. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but again, I've found so many times that people forget. We used to tell our players all the time, you are always on stage. And as the leader, you certainly are. Eyes are always on you, whether you want to believe that or not. So I think it's so essential that you develop consistency by being a great example for the people that you are leading. The sixth one is lead with profit, and that is what I call our leadership philosophy. And simply what that said is that we would talk to our players all the time about leaving a profit. Means everything that we touch, we want to get better, not worse. And an illustration is that when we would go on the road just to play an opponent, when we'd walk in the locker room, we always emphasize we want to leave the locker room in better shape than when we got there. And for example, I would walk in, and if I saw a piece of garbage on the floor, I would pick it up, And again, we're just, because I think it starts with the little things that turn into big things. And if you develop that philosophy by doing the little things, it's going to lead to much greater positive things for your team or organization. And then the last one is servant leadership. And dividing that up is, the leadership part goes back to your clarifying vision. People need someone that's going to take them in the right direction. And then the servant part is really flipping the pyramid of the old leadership style. That the leaders on top, and all the subordinates are down below, and and they're serving the leader. And what all the research is now saying, that most effective leaders are people that are serving and having that servant's mindset of how can I support my leaders or my people. And the other part of that is to develop the people that are on your team into leaders. And I think that's the best thing. You want to leave a legacy is by building a great leadership team and everybody you work with into leaders, so that if you leave the organization, that it can flourish without you and even take it to another level. And we see that examples, and I know I'm proud. I've left my basketball program 3 years ago to speak full time, and I'm really proud that my assistant coach, because he worked with me 16 years, and I spent a lot of time. He's taken the program to a great level. I mean, I think my first 3 years, averaged about 8 wins a year. In his first 3 years, I think he's averaging 19 wins a year.
Oh, wow.
So I'm pretty proud that he's been able to really keep it going, and it's something that I know early in my career when I left another program. My assistant and I, we'd spent a lot of time, but he didn't do a good enough job mentoring, and their program started to slip after a few years. And I went back, when I started to analyze, what, that was my fault, because I didn't do a good enough job of teaching him how to be an effective leader.
So I guess before we go, I'm hoping that you can share with us how educators can put fun and healthy competition back into the schools using your motto, think bigger, lead better, and win more.
Well, I believe that, we went through what I call the trophy era, where, we got a trophy just for participating. And I truly believe that that's not exactly how the world works. And so I'm very careful that I believe competition can be really good as long as you set up some ideas on how the competition should be run, and what are you trying to accomplish, and what are you trying to teach, and what should your students or your athletes, or a combination of both, what are you trying to have them learn? Because I believe competition is really important in setting up different ways that you can make competition. But I think the other thing that's hugely important when you're setting up some team competitions where you're teaching them how to work together, and how they can, when you work with a group, because when you get out in society, in the most cases, you're working with some type of team. And if you don't know how to work with a team, I think that's going to hurt you. There's some people that are really talented that don't seem to ever be able to find a team because no one wants them. And I think that's, I look at, I'm going to give you a basketball illustration, Carmelo Anthony, that, will probably be in the Hall of Fame, yet he never did very well in the playoffs. And I think because, his mindset is I was going to score points, and
Right.
winning was nice, but that wasn't the essential thing. And so I think it's really important as you set up competitions that you want to highlight successes of individuals, but I think it's really important to set up competitions where you're highlighting the ability to work together. Because to me, the ultimate is when you put a group of people together and work for a common goal, and you're able to achieve it. Boy, there's not too many better things in life than that.
I love that. I love anything that can to test character, because like you said, I mean, everything you talked about today, it comes back. If you don't have the character for leadership, then I think you always find yourself struggling.
Yes. Yep.
Coach, I want to thank you again for joining us on Anchored in Education today.
My pleasure. It was great. It was always good to talk to you, and I love the work you're doing, and I'm here to support you.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, you can find Coach Jim Johnson on Twitter. His handle is at Coach Jim Johnson. I'm putting a link to him on my website, escottengland.com, so you can follow him today. You'll also find a link to Coach's website, as well as a link to his book, A Coach and a Miracle, in this episode's show notes. Before I close out today's episode, I want to encourage you to subscribe to Anchored in Education on whichever platform you listen to podcasts on. Now, I still can't get over that outhouse to penthouse analogy that Jim used. I am guilty of this. I remembered when I entered education, I had decided that I would turn everything upside down and conquer all problems. Oh, how wrong I was. I like Jim's leadership lessons because they have been tried and tested by him and his players. I also like them because they are not stuffy business-like leadership lessons. They are down-to-earth, user-friendly lessons we can all learn from and we can all put into action. I also like them because they can be implemented at all levels of education, in the classroom, the school, the district, or even on the courts and fields. I am with Coach in that if you are not doing your passion, then it is time to step back and find what your passion truly is. I hope that education is your passion, because having and reaching goals, maintaining perseverance, and seizing the day becomes a whole lot easier. We need passionate people supporting our students, because at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.